On July 6, 2020, Berkshire Hathaway quietly killed an American boot brand that had been making work boots for 119 years, shuttering 2 factories in rural Missouri in a single Monday morning announcement. 318 workers in rural Missouri lost their jobs in a single announcement. The brand on the box did not change. The American flag on the label did not change. But the boots inside that box are now made in China. We are going to expose how Wall Street and a Japanese retail chain hollowed out the American work boot industry, and we are going to show you the only 3 places left in the Pacific Northwest where a real logger boot is still built by hand, by people whose names are stitched into every pair. If you have walked into an outdoor retailer recently, you might believe you are looking at a competitive marketplace full of heritage American boot brands. You see names like Chippewa, Danner, Georgia Boot, Carolina, Durango, Justin, and Tony Lama, and you assume these are different companies competing to build the toughest boot for the American worker. That is an illusion. The reality is that a small handful of conglomerates control almost the entire category. Berkshire Hathaway owns Chippewa, Justin, Tony Lama, and Nocona. Rocky Brands owns Georgia Boot, Durango, Lehigh, Muck, and Extra Tough. Wolverine Worldwide owns Bates, Caterpillar, Merrill, and Hush Puppies. And a Tokyo-based retail chain called ABC-Mart now owns both Danner and White's Boots. When you spend $300 on a Chippewa logger today, you are not buying from a small team of cobblers in Wisconsin. You are buying from a publicly traded conglomerate whose nearest factory is in Guangdong province. The American flag on the box is the last piece of America left in that boot. But there are still a few stubborn shops that refuse to sell, refuse to offshore, and refuse to let the conglomerates touch them. Almost all of them are clustered in one city in eastern Washington, inside a 6-mile radius, in a place the boot community quietly calls the work boot Mafia of Spokane. To understand what was lost, you have to understand one man named Otto White. In 1915, Otto moved his family's boot company from the East Coast to Spokane, Washington, because the Inland Empire timber industry was screaming for boots tough enough to survive a logging camp. Otto did something almost nobody does anymore. He personally fitted loggers in their camps, kept a private diary of arch tracings from thousands of fittings, and used that data to design what he called the Arch Ease Last, which he trademarked in 1926. Every American hand-built logger boot since then is essentially a derivative of Otto's pattern. He also did something even more unusual. He sponsored European immigrant cobblers, gave them jobs on his factory floor, and rented them company-owned houses on 8th Street. Over the next 60 years, those immigrants and their children spread out across the city and started their own competing shops. In 1964, a Ukrainian cobbler named Nikolai Blahutsin, who had spent 8 years on Otto's cutting floor, opened a small shop on East Sprague Avenue. He called it Nick's. 3 decades later, in 1994, another Ukrainian named John Kaji arrived in Spokane with no English and no money, and within 1 week of landing on American soil, he was building boots inside the local cluster. He eventually opened his own shop on East Sprague, just down the road. Today, White's, Nick's, and JK are all within 6 miles of each other. And then there is Frank Petrilli, who founded a 4th Spokane shop in 2016 after 25 years at Nick's, opening Frank's Boots inside the old Nick's building on Market Street. Frank put it best in an interview. He said that without Otto White, none of the others would be here. Spokane became the handmade boot capital of the United States by accident on the back of one immigrant-friendly factory owner who died in 1972. But here is the part the boot industry does not want you to know. 2 of those 3 legendary Spokane brands no longer belong to the families who built them, and one of them is now owned by a company you have never heard of. Headquartered in Tokyo, but factory ownership is only half the problem. The materials and the labor have been engineered out of the modern work boot. Walk into any big box retailer and pick up a boot priced under $150. Look inside it. The lining is glued, not stitched. The sole is cement construction, meaning the entire boot is held together by industrial adhesive. When that adhesive fails, and it always fails, the boot is garbage. It cannot be resoled. It cannot be rebuilt. It is engineered for the landfill within a single working season. Compare that to a hand-built Spokane boot. A white smoke jumper passes through more than 25 unique hand stages on a wooden last that was carved in 1940. The vamp is sewn directly into the leather insole using a steel awl by hand at 3 stitches per inch by a single bootmaker. Eric Kinney, the current president of White's, personally hand-sewed an estimated 50,000 pairs before he was promoted off the floor. The boot is held together not by glue, but by solid brass clinching tacks, because brass does not rust when it absorbs foot perspiration the way steel does. That single material choice is what allows a White's smoke jumper to be rebuilt 3, 4, even 5 times across a 30-year service life. Now consider the leather. Nick selects only 1 3/4 pairs of boots from a single cowhide. A typical mass-market factory cuts 5 to 6 pairs from the same hide. Nick's throws away 2/3 of every cow because the company refuses to use the soft, scarred, low-density sections of the leather. That single statistic is why a Nick's Builder Pro costs $540 and a Chinese-made work boot at a hardware store costs $60, and it is not just leather. Spokane bootmakers also use solid brass nails and brass tacks throughout the construction. The mass market industry switched to steel decades ago because steel is cheaper, even though steel rusts inside the boot the moment a worker's foot starts to sweat. Walk into a Spokane factory today, and you will hear the same hammer rhythm Otto White heard in 1915. Walk into a Chinese factory, and you will hear an injection molding machine. But here is where the story gets genuinely dark. Even the heritage American brands have been hollowed out from the inside. Tony Lama, who is now in international sales for Justin Brands, admitted on the record that roughly half of Chippewas footwear is produced in China. 20% of the Nocona brand comes from Mexico, and between 75 and 80% of the Justin Boots brand is crafted overseas. Now wait, it gets worse. Danner is the worst offender of the bunch. In 2014, when Lacrosse Footwear announced its purchase of White's, the Lacrosse spokesperson admitted to the Spokesman-Review newspaper that Danner was already shipping about 2/3 of its production overseas. 2/3. The Portland factory that Danner uses in its glossy marketing videos accounts for roughly 1 in 3 pairs the company actually sells. Some of the boots that say Made in USA on the tongue label are actually built with imported uppers, stitched in China and merely finished in Oregon. The Federal Trade Commission allows this loophole, and the conglomerates exploit it relentlessly. Then in 2012, ABC-Mart, a Japanese retail chain that nobody in America had ever heard of, paid $138 million to acquire all of Lacrosse, including Danner. 2 years later, in 2014, that same Japanese parent acquired White's Boots. The 2 largest American outdoor boot manufacturers in the Pacific Northwest now answer to the same Tokyo office. So when Berkshire Hathaway announced on July 6, 2020, that it was permanently closing the Justin and Chippewa factories in Carthage and Cassville, Missouri, 318 workers learned what a lot of American craftspeople have learned this century. The flag on the box was the last thing to leave the country. So if the heritage label is meaningless, and the conglomerates have offshored every brand your grandfather wore, what do you actually buy? You buy from the 3 Spokane shops that refuse to sell their souls. White's Boots, founded in 1853, is still running its 42,000 square foot factory at 4002 East Ferry Avenue. About 90 boot makers process 400,000 square feet of leather a year. The flagship smoke jumper is the original Wildland firefighter boot, built to the federal NFPA 1977 standard, sewn with fire-resistant Technora thread that has a melting point of 900 degrees, and outfitted with a Vibram Fire and ice sole. It costs around $775, and it can be rebuilt 3 to 5 times across decades. There is one catch you should know about. White's was sold in 2014 to that Tokyo-based retailer ABC-Mart, which operates around 800 stores across Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The factory is still in Spokane. The bootmakers are still American, but the parent company is Japanese. Then there is Nick's, founded in 1964, now run by Steve Moe and his son Schuyler out of an East Sprague Avenue facility. Nick's deliberately removed the apostrophe from the brand name when Moe took over, because, as Steve put it, an apostrophe implies ownership, and the success of Nick's belongs to more than one person. Lead times now run 18 to 35 weeks because every pair is hand-lasted by humans, not machines. And then there is JK Boots, founded by John Kaji in 1994, still entirely family-operated by John, his wife Natalie, and their 3 sons. The flagship Fire and Lander is the boot of choice for many smoke jumpers and hotshot crews. Every work boot is still built in Spokane. If you want a brand that has never been sold to anyone, ever, in over 100 years, you drive 350 miles south to Scappoose, Oregon, and you buy a Wesco. The Shoemaker family has owned that factory since 1918, 4 generations. Their Boss Engineer model has been in continuous production since 1939. They have never accepted a private equity offer. Then there is Hoffman Boots, just over the Idaho border in Kellogg. Started in 1973 by 3 Hoffman brothers and now run by their children, Tom, Jim, and Beth Hoffman. The Hoffmans are famous for inventing the replaceable caulk system that loggers can swap out themselves instead of renailing every spike, and they have stayed family-owned for over 50 years. And then there is the option almost no one talks about: the pre-acquisition vintage boot, a White's logger built before the 2014 sale, a Chippewa from the Carthage, Missouri factory before the 2020 closure, a Danner Mountain Light stitched in Portland before the 2012 buyout. These boots show up on eBay and in the Reddit Goodyear Welt community every week, often for under $200, and they can be rebuilt by any of the Spokane shops for around $400. You end up with a boot that will outlast everything in the modern catalog for less than half the price of a new pair off the shelf. When you wear a vintage white smoke jumper, you are wearing an asset that has already fully depreciated and was built when the parent company still answered to a family name in Spokane. The era of widespread American craftsmanship in work boots is mostly over, and the conglomerates are banking on you not noticing. They are counting on the flag and the heritage logo and the cowboy on the box to distract you from the fact that the boot inside was assembled in a factory you cannot pronounce. But if you know where to look, and if you are willing to wait 6 months for a custom build instead of grabbing something off a shelf, you can still buy a boot that will be on your feet in the year 2050. White's, Nick's, JK, Wesco, Hoffman, and Frank's. 6 small shops, around 250 craftspeople. That is what is left of an American industry that once employed tens of thousands. Buy from them while they are still here. Check the manufacturing lineage. Check the parent company. And never underestimate the value of a boot that an immigrant cobbler hand-stitched in eastern Washington while the rest of the country was sleeping. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe for more stories like this.